"You're going to burn with this house, you cursed old woman." Those were the last words I heard before the flames swallowed my living room. My name is Linda Cooper, and that night my only son, Mark, turned my home and my heart into ashes. The air smelled of gasoline. My throat tightened as smoke began to fill the room. Mark stood near the front door, a box of matches in his hand, eyes hollow, unrecognizable. He struck one. The sound of that tiny spark cut through the silence like a verdict. The curtain caught first, then the sofa, then everything I had built over 40 years of sacrifice. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just stood there staring at the man I had raised. The same boy who once cried in my arms when he broke his first toy. Now he was breaking something far more precious, his mother. When the match fell, he turned his back and walked out. The echo of the door lock clicking shut behind him. Through the window, I watched his car drive away, headlights slicing through the darkness. He didn't look back. For a moment, the heat paralyzed me. The fire roared like a living thing, feeding on every memory, every photograph, every letter William and I had ever shared. But even in that chaos, my mind was clear. There was one thing I had to save: the small metal box hidden beneath the floorboards in my bedroom. William, my late husband, had made me promise to protect it. "If the day ever comes when fire finds you," he once said, "this box will protect what really matters." I covered my face with a damp towel, stumbled through the smoke, and pulled the loose boards aside. The box was still there. Blackened by soot, but intact. I pressed it against my chest, feeling the heat sear through my dress. Every step toward the window felt heavier than the last. But fear was no longer stronger than love. I pushed the window open and jumped. The cold night air hit my lungs like a slap. I rolled on the grass, coughing, gasping, clutching the box to my chest. The house behind me groaned as flames tore through its bones. Neighbors' voices echoed in the distance. Someone was shouting my name. When they reached me, I was barefoot, covered in ash. My hair singed, but my eyes dry. Mrs. Miller, my neighbor, ran toward me. "My God, Linda, what happened?" she cried. "An accident," I lied, my voice trembling. "It must have been the gas line." No one suspected. No one imagined it was my own son who had struck the match. As firefighters drowned what remained of my home, I sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the roof collapse. 40 years of my life disappeared into the night sky. And yet, as I touched the box under the blanket, I whispered to myself, "The house may be gone, but my story isn't over." The next morning, I woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by the faint smell of antiseptic and smoke. Every inch of my body ached, but my mind was sharp. The fire had taken almost everything, except my memory, and the small metal box hidden under the thin blanket beside me. A nurse smiled gently when she saw I was awake. "You're lucky, Mrs. Cooper," she said softly. "The firefighters said the flames were everywhere." Lucky. That word felt strange in my mouth. I nodded, pretending to agree, while my eyes drifted toward the metal box. Hours later, Mark arrived. His expression was carefully arranged, half shock, half pity. He carried cheap flowers and wore guilt like a costume. "Mom," he began quietly, pulling a chair to my bedside, "I can't believe this happened. I thought you were gone." I studied his face. The tone was right, but the eyes gave him away. Cold, calculated, watching for signs of suspicion. "It was an accident," he added quickly. "An accident?" I repeated, my voice calm. "The gas line, maybe?" "Yes, that must be it." He exhaled in visible relief, mistaking my act for confusion. He reached for my hand. "Don't worry, Mom. Houses can be rebuilt." I smiled faintly. "Yes," I said, "but not every soul can." He looked puzzled for a moment, then smiled as if nothing had passed between us. I didn't say another word. Silence is a weapon when you use it wisely. After he left, I slipped the box under my pillow. No one knew I had it. Not the nurses, not the police who came to take statements, not even Mark. It was my secret, my salvation. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed, I stared at the ceiling. Images of the fire flashed before my eyes, the roar, the heat. The moment my son turned away from me, tears filled my eyes, but none fell. Grief had already burned them dry. In that sterile white room, I made myself a promise. I would rebuild. But this time, not with wood or bricks. I would rebuild with truth. And the truth was sleeping quietly beneath my pillow, inside that metal box. A week later, the doctors discharged me. My body had healed faster than my heart, but I played the role of the frail old woman perfectly. Mark insisted I stay with him and Chloe, his wife, just until things get sorted out. I nodded politely. Deep down, I knew what they really wanted. To keep me close, to make sure I stayed silent. Their house was beautiful, modern, and cold. The kind of place where everything looked perfect but nothing felt alive. Chloe greeted me with a bright smile and a voice soaked in false sweetness. "Oh, Mrs. Cooper, you'll be so comfortable here. I've prepared the guest room for you." Her eyes flickered toward Mark, as if seeking approval. The guest room was at the far end of the hallway, next to the laundry room. No windows, no sunlight, just distance. Still, I thanked her, pretending not to notice. A woman who acts weak can move unseen, and I needed that invisibility. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. The house was silent, except for muffled whispers coming from the living room. I held my breath and listened. "She shouldn't have survived," Chloe hissed. "I know," Mark replied, his voice low and angry. "I don't understand how she got out." "What if she remembers something?" "She won't. She's old, confused, and even if she does, she has no proof." A long silence followed. Then Mark spoke again, even softer. "Then we'll finish what we started." The words sank into me like a knife. For a moment, fear crept up my spine, but only for a moment. Because fear is a luxury I no longer allowed myself. Instead, I smiled in the dark. They thought I was weak. They thought I was forgetful. They had no idea that the woman lying in that tiny room remembered every word, every smell, every flicker of fire. The next morning, over breakfast, I pretended nothing had happened. Chloe poured coffee with her fake warmth. "Did you sleep well, Mrs. Cooper?" "Like a child," I said sweetly, though I did dream of fire. The spoon slipped from her hand. Mark froze mid-bite. I smiled gently. "Funny how dreams can feel so real, isn't it?" They said nothing. But I knew then I wasn't just surviving in that house. I was watching. And sooner or later I would strike back. A few days later I waited until the house was empty. Mark and Chloe had gone out shopping, their laughter fading down the driveway. The moment their car disappeared, I locked my door and pulled the small metal box from the bottom of my suitcase. Its surface was blackened, the edges bent from heat, but it still held its weight. The weight of secrets my husband William had buried decades ago. I ran my fingers over the lid, remembering his voice. "If the fire ever finds you, Linda, this box will protect what truly matters." For years I had wondered what he meant. Now I finally understood this was never about protection. It was about truth. Inside were letters, photographs, old deeds, and one sealed envelope marked for Linda, if the fire returns. My hands trembled as I opened it. The paper was yellowed, but the words were clear. "My dearest Linda, if you're reading this, it means the fire has come again. I never told you everything about my past. Before I met you, I made mistakes. And from those mistakes came a life I could never admit to. There is another son. His name is Michael Turner. He carries my blood and my name, though not legally. If darkness ever falls upon you, find him. He will bring you light." I froze. Another son. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked at the old photographs scattered across the bed. There he was, a young man beside William, both smiling, standing in front of a car shop sign, Turner's Garage. So that's where he'd gone on those business trips. The realization hit me like a second fire. Mark's betrayal wasn't just greed, it was ignorance. He thought he was the rightful heir, but the truth was buried long before he was born. I gathered the documents carefully, wrapping them back inside a scarf. Every word on those pages was a spark, and I knew exactly where to aim it. This wasn't revenge. This was balance being restored. When I heard the car pull up outside, I slid the box beneath my bed again. Chloe's voice echoed down the hallway. "Mrs. Cooper, we're home." I called back, steady and calm. I was just resting. That night, I sat by the window, watching the moonlight touch the tips of the trees. The fire had taken my house, but not my reason. I understood now what William meant when he said fire only destroys what is useless. Maybe, after all these years, it had come not to end me but to remind me of what still burned within me. I looked at the box one last time before hiding it again. For years I feared the fire, I whispered. But now, I'm ready to use it. The next morning I packed a small bag and told Mark I needed some fresh air. He barely looked up from his phone. "Don't wander too far, Mom. You're still recovering." I smiled politely. "Of course, dear." Instead, I boarded a bus heading north. The letter had mentioned Turner's Garage, and there was only one with that name still open 2 towns away in Washington state. As the scenery rolled past the window, my heartbeat steadied. For the first time since the fire, I wasn't running from something, I was moving toward it. When I arrived, the garage was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of tools. A man in his 40s stood beside an old red pickup, grease on his hands, sunlight in his hair. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. "Can I help you, ma'am?" For a moment I couldn't speak. Because when I saw his eyes, those steady gray eyes, I saw William. "You're Michael Turner?" I finally asked. He nodded cautiously. "Yes, Mom, do I know you?" I handed him the letter. "No, but you knew my husband." He frowned, then unfolded the paper. The color drained from his face as he read the first line. "William Cooper," he whispered. He wrote this?" "Yes," I said softly. "He wanted you to know the truth." Michael leaned against the workbench, silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. "He used to visit me when I was little. Said he was a friend of my mother's. I never knew why he stopped coming." Tears welled in his eyes. I thought he forgot about me. "He didn't," I said. "He just couldn't tell anyone." We sat there for a while, the sound of distant traffic filling the silence. Then he asked, "Why now? Why come to me?" "Because his other son tried to burn me alive," I replied, my voice steady. "And your father believed you were the only one who could help me put things right." Michael nodded slowly, the grief in his eyes turning to resolve. "What do you need me to do?" "Not revenge," I said, "justice." He smiled faintly. "Then we'll get it?" Together we began collecting proof, DNA tests, property papers, and William's handwritten confession. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The fire had taken my house, but it had given me back a family. And this time, I wasn't going to lose it again. A week later, I returned to Oregon. Mark and Chloe were sitting in the living room when I walked in, acting as if nothing had ever happened. Chloe greeted me with her usual sugar-coated smile. "Did you enjoy your little trip, Mrs. Cooper?" I smiled back. "Yes, I met someone who reminded me of William." Mark glanced up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just someone with his eyes," I said casually, placing my bag on the floor. It was the first time I'd seen fear flicker across his face since the fire. That evening I invited them both to dinner. "I think it's time we talked about the house," I said, stirring my tea slowly. Chloe's smile stiffened. "Oh, Linda, that's such a painful topic. Maybe you should rest." "I've rested enough," I replied, my tone calm. "Fire doesn't always come from outside." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mark's hand tightened around his glass. "What are you talking about?" I looked him straight in the eyes. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." The silence stretched. Then I stood and picked up my coat. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "meet me at what's left of the old house. There's something you need to see." Before either of them could speak, I walked away. The next morning, the sky was gray and heavy with fog. The remains of my home stood quiet, charred wood, and memories turned to dust. Mark arrived late, eyes darting nervously. "Why are we here?" he asked. I knelt beside the ruins, brushed aside some ashes, and pulled out the metal box. "This," I said, "is what your father wanted me to protect." I opened it slowly. Inside lay the letter, the photos, and the deed bearing William's signature. Mark stared, speechless. "What is this?" he whispered. "The truth," I said softly. "Your father had another son. His name is Michael Turner." Mark's face drained of color. "You're lying?" "I wish I were," I replied, "but blood doesn't lie, and neither do official papers." He took a step back, shaking his head. All of this is fake, you're insane. Maybe, I said quietly, closing the box. But even a crazy woman can tell the difference between smoke and lies. Mark turned, storming toward his car. Where are you going? I called after him. Far away from you, he spat. I watched his taillights fade into the fog, and for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. The ashes under my feet were cold now. But deep inside me, something had just begun to burn, a steady, controlled flame called justice. And I knew this time it would be his turn to face the fire. The following weeks felt like calm before a storm. Mark stopped visiting my room, and Chloe tiptoed around the house as if she were living with a ghost. They didn't know that every night I met with Michael over the phone. We planned each step carefully, quietly, legally, precisely. Justice, after all, is a fire that burns clean. One morning, a letter arrived at the door. It was from a lawyer in Portland. Mark had filed a petition to gain full control of my finances, claiming I was mentally unstable after the fire. For a few seconds, my hands trembled, then I laughed. How predictable, I whispered. That afternoon, I called Michael. It's time, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. I'll be there by morning. When he arrived, the air felt charged like lightning before rain. He carried a leather briefcase, worn but dignified. I spoke to Father's old notary, he said. Everything is official now. The deeds, the bank records, even the DNA test. I nodded. Good, then let the truth breathe. At noon, Mark burst through the front door, waving papers in his hand. What the hell is this? He shouted, slamming them on the table. An official claim, I answered. Your father's estate was never yours. Michael stood quietly beside me. Mark's eyes darted between us. Who is this? I smiled. Your brother. Mark laughed bitterly. Another scam. You really have lost it. Michael opened the briefcase and laid out the documents one by one. Birth certificate, notarized statements, the DNA results. Silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. No, Mark whispered, backing away. Yes, I said firmly. And now, everything your father built will return to the hands it was meant for. He clenched his fists. You'll regret this. I shook my head. No, Mark, I regretted raising a son who valued ashes more than truth. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. But this time I didn't flinch. Michael looked at me, his expression calm but determined. What happens now? He asked. We wait, I replied. The law will finish what the fire started. That night, as I sat by the window, I watched the rain fall softly over the burned remains of my old home. Each drop hissed as it touched the blackened earth, like the sound of pain being extinguished. For the first time in years, I didn't fear the fire's return. I had faced it, survived it, and used it. Now the only thing that burned in me was peace. A steady flame that could no longer be taken away. And when I finally closed my eyes, I whispered, Justice doesn't scream, it glows. 2 weeks later, the day of the hearing arrived. The courthouse was small, but the tension inside it could have burned through steel. Mark sat on one side of the room, perfectly dressed in a gray suit, his face calm but his fingers twitching against the table. Behind him sat Chloe, pale and silent, pretending she wasn't terrified. I entered quietly, leaning on my cane. Beside me walked Michael, composed and steady, holding the folder that carried our proof. The deeds, the letters, the DNA results, the truth that had slept for decades. When the judge entered, the murmurs faded. Mrs. Cooper, he began, you're contesting your son's petition for guardianship. Yes, Your Honor, I replied clearly. I am of sound mind. The only fire that damaged anything in my life came from greed, not confusion. A few people in the courtroom chuckled softly. Mark's jaw tightened. He stood and began his statement, full of rehearsed sorrow. My mother is ill, he said. Since the fire, she's imagined impossible stories about secret sons and conspiracies. I'm only trying to protect what's left of our family. The judge turned to me. Ms. Cooper, do you have anything to present? I nodded to Michael. He stepped forward and laid the documents neatly on the bench. Your Honor, he said, my name is Michael Turner. William Cooper was my biological father, This is the evidence proving that? The judge took the folder and read in silence. The entire room felt frozen. Mark's voice cracked. This is insane. He can't be. Sit down, Mr. Cooper, the judge ordered. Minutes passed. Then the gavel struck once. The evidence is clear. Ownership of the Cooper estate remains with Mrs. Linda Cooper, and, upon her passing, transfers legally to Mr. Michael Turner. Mark's face collapsed. He stood abruptly, shouting, "You can't do this. She's my mother." I looked at him and said softly, "And you tried to burn that word away." He stopped. The room was silent except for the sound of my cane tapping as I left. Justice had spoken. That evening, I sat on the porch of my rebuilt home. The sky was painted in the soft orange of a dying sunset. Michael joined me with 2 cups of tea. "Do you feel lighter now?" he asked. I smiled. Lighter, yes, but not empty. The fire took a lot, but it left something better: clarity. We sat in silence for a long while, watching the flames in the small fireplace dance gently. For the first time, I didn't see danger in the light. I saw peace. Fire, I thought, doesn't destroy the truth. It reveals it. And that night, as the stars blinked above the quiet town, I finally forgave the ashes for everything they had burned away. A few weeks after the trial, life returned to a quiet rhythm. Michael worked at the repair shop that once belonged to William. The sound of engines and laughter drifted through town again, reminding everyone that not all endings come with silence, some end with renewal. I spent my mornings tending the small garden behind the house. Lilies, roses, and a single stubborn lemon tree that somehow survived both the fire and the years. It stood crooked but alive, a mirror of myself. Then one morning, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting made my breath hitch. It was from the hospital in Portland. Mark Cooper had been admitted weeks ago for exhaustion and dehydration. Now he was being discharged. He had listed me as his emergency contact. For a long moment I stood still, the paper trembling in my hands. After everything, he still wrote my name, Mother. I packed a small bag and left that afternoon. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and loneliness. Mark sat by the window, thinner, older, broken. When he turned to see me, his eyes widened, full of disbelief. "Mom, you came." "I did," I said softly. "Someone had to." He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "I don't deserve this." "No," I said, pulling up a chair, "but forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you're lucky to receive." He lowered his head into his hands, sobbing quietly. "I thought money would fix everything. I thought I could build a life from ashes." "You can," I said, "but only if you stop setting fires." He looked up, eyes swollen, searching my face. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was so lost." "I know," I whispered. "The world tells us success means having more. But sometimes it just means being able to look in the mirror without shame." I reached out and touched his cheek, the same cheek I'd kissed when he was a boy. For a moment, the years melted away. No lies, no fire, no greed, just a mother and her son. When I stood to leave, he gripped my hand. "Will you ever forgive me?" I smiled sadly. "I already have." "You're the one who still needs to forgive yourself." As I walked out of the hospital, I didn't cry. The air outside was warm, carrying the faint smell of jasmine and rain. I took a deep breath. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't extinguish the fire. It simply teaches you how to live beside its light without getting burned. Weeks passed, and peace finally settled into every corner of my life. Michael stopped by each morning before work, bringing fresh bread or a handful of wildflowers. We'd sit on the porch together, sharing quiet conversation over steaming cups of coffee. He'd tell me about the customers who still remembered William, and how people now spoke of the Cooper name with respect instead of pity. The town, once curious and judgmental, now smiled at me as I walked by. It felt as though the smoke had finally lifted, not just from my home, but from my heart. And yet, every evening when the sun sank behind the hills, I'd light a small candle in the fireplace, not to chase away darkness, but to remember what had been burned away and what had survived. One evening, Michael joined me with a solemn expression. I visited Mark, he said quietly. I looked at him, calm. And? He's working at a local warehouse now, alone but sober, trying to start over. I nodded slowly. Good. Fire doesn't always destroy, sometimes it purifies. He leaned forward, studying my face. Do you ever regret it all? I smiled faintly. No, son. If the fire hadn't come, I would have never known what was true. Sometimes life needs to burn you to show you who you really are. We sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the crickets hum outside. The air smelled of wet earth and lemon blossoms. It reminded me of William, of the early days when love was simple. And of the promise I had once made to protect what was fair, no matter the cost. That night, after Michael left, I stood by the fireplace again. The flame flickered softly, painting shadows across the walls. I whispered into the quiet room. William, it's done. The truth is home again. For a moment I could almost hear his voice, gentle, warm, proud. The firelight reflected in the photo frame on the mantel. The three of us now connected across time, William, Michael, and me. The next morning I walked through my garden, touching the leaves still wet from dawn. The lemon tree was blooming again, tiny white flowers, stubborn and alive. And I realized something. The fire had never really been my enemy. It had simply been my teacher. So if you're listening to this story, remember this: don't fear the fire that comes to test you. Because fire only destroys what's false, but it purifies what's real. And if you survive it, you don't come out weaker. You come out true. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs strength, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because somewhere out there another soul might be standing in the flames right now, and your light might just help them find their way out.